Two figures in hoods are bolting through the upscale neighborhoods of Woodland Hills, California. The time is 4:53 p.m. on January 23, 2017. Their hands are still stained with fresh blood. In their wake, behind $1 million mansion, a renowned hairstylist is bleeding out on his own patio. He's suffering from multiple stab wounds to his neck, face, and chest. And at this very moment, his teenage daughter is on her way home from school, with no idea she's about to walk into a scene of horror that will scar her for life. This is the story of Fabio Semitelli, a successful and charismatic Italian immigrant who created an empire in the world of beauty. But at its core, this is a story of the ultimate betrayal, a tale of greed, obsession, and a meticulously planned murder, all masterminded by the one person who was supposed to love him most. For those of you who are deep into true crime and criminal investigations, we have a new book you won't want to miss called The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers. It features 180 case files on the world's most infamous murderers, and it's available now on Amazon. You can also grab the PDF version straight from our website for an instant download. We've put the link in the description box and in a pinned comment. Now, let's get back to today's case. It was January 23, 2017. The 911 call was logged at 4:54 p.m. The voice on the line belonged to a teenage girl, shaking with pure terror, desperately pleading for someone to save her father's life. 16-year-old Isabella Semitelli had just gotten home from school to find her dad, Fabio, lying in a spreading pool of his own blood on their backyard patio. The scene was a nightmare. The multiple stab wounds told a story of savage violence. While paramedics raced to the location, Isabella's chilling screams echoed through the quiet neighborhood, but it was already too late. Fabio Semitelli, at 49 years old, was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial theory was a home invasion that had taken a violent turn. After all, two hooded figures were spotted on a neighbor's security footage, just moments before the attack, jogging in the direction of the Semitelli residence at 4:18 p.m. Fabio's black Porsche was gone from the driveway, and was later discovered abandoned 5 miles away with droplets of blood inside. But as investigators began to process the crime scene, certain details just weren't adding up. Detective Ryan Werner, with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, meticulously examined the evidence. Fabio's high-end Rolex was still on his wrist, and his wallet was found undisturbed in his pocket. In fact, nothing of value was missing from the luxurious home. There were no ransacked drawers, no empty safes, and absolutely no signs of a forced entry. The timeline of events seemed almost surgically precise. At 4:18 p.m., the cameras caught two individuals jogging towards the house. Then, at 4:53 p.m., the black Porsche is seen speeding away. And at 4:54 p.m., a mere 60 seconds later, Isabella's car pulls into the driveway. It felt as if the killers knew the exact window of opportunity when Fabio would be alone and completely vulnerable. Just 3 days after the murder, Fabio's wife, Monica Semitelli, held a memorial service for him. Friends and family gathered in the very same backyard where he had been so brutally killed, there to mourn a man who had touched countless lives through his work in the beauty industry. Monica seemed completely devastated. She could barely string a sentence together, repeating over and over, "I'm not a wife anymore. I'm not a wife anymore." Her grief appeared to be overwhelming, all-consuming, but there was someone at the memorial who just didn't belong. A friend of Monica's, Deborah Obard, spotted him right away, a man she had never seen before, casually mingling with the grieving family members. Something about his presence felt deeply wrong. He didn't seem to fit in with Fabio's usual circle of friends and colleagues. Yet there he was, offering condolences, looking completely out of place. And she noticed he had a bandage wrapped around his left index finger. Obard was so unsettled by him that she discreetly took his picture and gave it to the police. That one photograph was the key that would blow the case wide open. The mystery man was identified as Robert Louis Baker, and within a few weeks, investigators uncovered something crucial. Baker's DNA was already on file in law enforcement databases because he was a registered sex offender. When they ran a comparison, his DNA was a perfect match for the blood droplets found. The DNA from inside Fabio's stolen Porsche was a direct hit, but that only opened up a bigger question. Who exactly was Robert Baker, and what was his motive for wanting Fabio Semitelli gone for good? The answer would unravel a tangled web of deceit, obsession, and betrayal that had been weaving its way through their lives for more than a year. Meet Robert Louis Baker, 53 years old, and he was not the man he pretended to be. By day, he was a racquetball coach at an LA Fitness in West Hills, charismatic, self-assured, and magnetic. One acquaintance would later describe him as having a powerful, alpha male presence, with an undeniable, almost predatory, charm. He played the part of a successful, well-liked mentor, always ready with a word of advice or encouragement. But underneath that carefully crafted exterior, a much darker reality was hiding. Back in 1993, Baker was convicted for unspeakable acts with a minor, his very own teenage stepdaughter. After serving his time, in a shocking turn of events, he actually married his victim, and the two of them went into the adult entertainment business together. By 2016, he had rebranded himself as a fitness instructor, projecting an image of complete respectability, while his disturbing past stayed buried deep. And that's when he first set his sights on Monica Semitelli. At 45 years old, Monica embodied everything Baker desperately craved. She was elegant, sophisticated, and married to a successful man, living the kind of wealthy lifestyle he was determined to have for himself. According to Baker's own testimony later on, she had 2 teenage daughters and appeared completely devoted to her husband of more than 20 years. Their affair ignited just weeks after meeting at the gym in early 2016, but what Monica couldn't possibly know was that she had just walked into the crosshairs of a predator, a man who had already torn one family apart and was more than willing to do it again. Baker wasted no time, moving quickly to isolate Monica from everyone and everything she knew. He persuaded her to communicate only through encrypted apps like Viber, and to use burner phones, the perfect tools to keep their secret life hidden from Fabio. Investigators would later uncover a startling fact. A full half of all Monica's digital communications were with Robert Baker. That's more than with her husband and 2 daughters put together. Let that sink in for a moment. Half of her entire digital existence revolved around this one man. In the fall of 2016, Monica's friend, Deborah Obard, started to get a bad feeling. She noticed Monica was spending more and more time at the gym, and always in the orbit of the same man. When Deborah confronted Monica about a possible affair, Monica flatly denied it all. So, Deborah took her concerns to Fabio, warning him to keep an eye on Monica's friends from the gym. Looking back, his response is absolutely heartbreaking. He brushed off the concern without a second thought, insisting he trusted his wife completely. After 2 decades of marriage, the thought that she would ever betray him seemed impossible. If only he knew that at that very moment, Robert Baker was already setting a deadly plan in motion. In late 2016, a man named Christopher Austin flew from Oregon to Los Angeles on a ticket paid for by Robert Baker himself. Austin, who was 36 years old, worked as a parole and probation officer, dealing with at-risk youth. He considered Baker to be a friend he'd known for years, and thought he was just coming down for a casual visit, maybe play some racquetball, soak up some of that California sun. He had no clue he was being sized up to be an accomplice to murder. Austin would later testify that Monica invited both him and Baker over to her house for dinner. She served them pizza, and then gave them a full tour, paying very close attention to the backyard patio area, the very spot where Fabio liked to unwind by the pool after a long day. She pointed out the layout, the exits, and all the potential blind spots. It was a scouting mission disguised as a friendly dinner. Around that same time, Monica reached out to a security company to upgrade their home surveillance system. The new setup gave her the ability to access the camera feeds remotely from her cell phone, from anywhere, at any time. She would now know the exact moment Fabio was home alone and at his most vulnerable. Baker's own preparations were even more chilling. He bought GPS tracking devices and covertly attached them to both of Fabio's cars, his daily driver, and his prized black Porsche. This meant Baker could watch Fabio's every move in real time, tracking him just like a hunter stalks its prey. Austin testified that Baker had spun a story, telling him Monica was trapped in an abusive marriage and was desperate to get Fabio out of her life. Baker crafted a narrative of Fabio as an abusive, controlling husband, turning Monica's life into a living hell. He cast himself in the role of her knight in shining armor, supposedly shielding her from a perilous marriage. However, it was Monica's own daughter, Jessica, whose later testimony would completely dismantle this carefully constructed lie. She recounted walking into her mother's bedroom one morning, back in 2016, only to find Robert Baker right there in her mother's bed. This affair had nothing to do with saving Monica from harm. This was never about protection or safety. It was purely about ownership. Baker was obsessed with having Monica entirely for himself, her life, her wealth, and her undivided focus, and he was prepared to eliminate anyone who stood in his way to get it. The financial incentive behind the plot was astronomical. Fabio held a life insurance policy worth $1.6 million. If he were gone, Monica would collect the entire sum, free to start a new chapter with Baker, with no messy divorce, no custody battles, and no splitting of assets, just a grieving widow and her new partner, funded by the life insurance payout. The planning stage was over. All that remained was finding the right moment to strike. That moment seemed to arrive on January 22, 2017, just one day before the fatal attack. According to testimony from accomplice Christopher Austin, Monica sent Baker a critical text message. Fabio was on his way to the store. This was their initial attempt to take Fabio's life. Baker and Austin got into position to ambush him, armed and ready, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. But the plan fell apart. Austin would later claim he lost his nerve and couldn't follow through with it that day. Maybe it was a sudden crisis of conscience, or maybe the setup just wasn't perfect. Regardless of the reason, Fabio arrived home unharmed that night, with absolutely no idea his own wife had just orchestrated an attempt on his life. But Baker was not deterred. He was in too deep and had invested too much to back out now. Monica had dangled the promise of a new life together, complete with access to the insurance payout and an escape from his own financial problems. He even tried to entice Austin by describing Monica's immense wealth, explaining that once Fabio was permanently out of the way, they could vanish and begin the life he felt they were entitled to. The strategy itself was brutally simple. Stage a robbery gone wrong, cash in the insurance policy, and start fresh in a new place. And that very night, Monica's actions spoke volumes about where her loyalties truly lay. Even as she comforted her daughters and put on the act of a loving wife, she was mentally arranging Fabio's funeral. The charade was officially underway. The trap was now laid. Fabio Semitelli had less than 24 hours left on this earth. The date was January 23, 2017, a day that would shatter the lives of multiple families forever. For Monica's plan to succeed, it hinged on precise timing and a rock-solid alibi. That afternoon, she drove away from the house in her black Ford pickup, telling Fabio she was just making a quick run to Target. It was a completely normal errand, designed to raise no suspicion. Sure enough, security cameras recorded her truck pulling into the Target parking lot at approximately 4 p.m. But there was a crucial detail. Before Monica ever walked into the store, another person slipped into her truck. Prosecutors would later argue that this individual was Robert Baker, there to receive his final instructions for the hit. Monica then went into Target, cementing her alibi, all while texting Baker the all-clear signal. Fabio was now home by himself. Once Baker got the go-ahead, he turned to Austin and said, "She's heading into the store. That gives us a tight window." Austin testified that Baker then had him get into the trunk of a rented Nissan, driving them to a staging point near the Semitelli residence. Once there, Baker armed Austin with a knife and asked him, "You in this with me?" Austin would later recount to the jury, "And like an idiot, I said yes," before following his lead. At 4:18 p.m., the two men began jogging in the direction of the house, appearing for all the world like two guys just out for an afternoon run. It was the perfect cover, a disguise that was captured on numerous home security cameras all over the neighborhood. Austin testified that Baker assured him the front door would be unlocked. Baker allegedly said, "She's going to leave the door open for us." When the prosecutor pressed him on who she was, Austin answered, without a moment's hesitation, "The defendant." And just as Baker had promised, the front door was unlocked, exactly as they had planned. At that very moment, Fabio Semitelli was sitting peacefully on his backyard patio, enjoying a quiet moment by his pool, after another productive day as a top executive at Wella, one of the globe's premier beauty corporations. This was a man who had built an entire empire on sheer talent and hard work, collaborating with Hollywood's elite and guiding up-and-coming stylists who looked up to him. He was completely blindsided by what came next. Robert Baker delivered a fatal, frenzied assault, striking Fabio repeatedly in the neck, face, and chest. The attack was so ferocious that Baker even wounded his own finger in the midst of the chaos. The very same finger he would have wrapped in a bandage when he audaciously showed up at Fabio's memorial service a mere 3 days later. Investigators found no defensive wounds on Fabio's body, a clear indication that he was ambushed, utterly caught off guard by assailants he didn't even know, men who were sent by the one woman who had vowed to love him for eternity. Baker and Austin made their getaway in Fabio's Porsche, ditching it just 5 miles from the scene. The timeline was meticulously planned, choreographed like a fatal performance. At 4:53 p.m., the assailants sped off. At 4:54 p.m., precisely 60 seconds later, Isabella's car turned into the driveway. Her horrified screams soon pierced the quiet neighborhood as she stumbled upon her father's body and frantically dialed 911. The dispatcher on the line walked her through desperate, life-saving measures. But Fabio's injuries were simply too catastrophic. It was too late. He was already gone. Just minutes later, Monica pulled up to her home, now swarming with police cruisers and ambulances. And that's when her act began. When Monica's friend, Elise Bluewell, got to the house later that evening, she was escorted inside by a stranger who gave her a bone-chilling warning. Be careful not to step in the blood. Inside, Monica was putting on a convincing show of a woman completely shattered. Bluewell recalled seeing her just sitting there, seemingly unable to string a coherent sentence together. "I'm not a wife anymore," she repeated over and over. "I'm not a wife anymore." The phrase became her mantra, a performance meant to convey unimaginable shock. But while Monica was putting on a public display of grief, she was privately celebrating her victory. On that very same night, before her husband had even been taken to the morgue, she was already making inquiries about Fabio's life insurance. She needed to know when the $1.6 million would be paid out. Her priorities couldn't have been clearer. The money was the goal. The grief was just an elaborate charade. For months, Monica skillfully maintained her facade as the heartbroken, widowed victim, all while secretly carrying on her torrid affair with Baker. Police surveillance teams documented their every move, capturing them on romantic getaways to Las Vegas and Myrtle Beach. Monica even began introducing herself to Baker's friends as Monica Baker. She was already living out the fantasy of their new life together, a life built on her dead husband's money. Monica was in constant contact with Detective Jean Parcel, but her calls weren't about finding justice for Fabio. Instead, she was fishing for updates on the DNA evidence and trying to get an estimate on when the insurance money would be released. Her concern wasn't about catching the men who murdered her husband. It was about cashing in on her payday. But what Monica didn't know was that investigators were watching her every move, documenting every suspicious phone call and every secret, romantic rendezvous. And her intricate web of lies was about to come crashing down. By February of 2017, Robert Baker had become their prime suspect. The discovery of his DNA inside Fabio's stolen Porsche was irrefutable, the kind of damning evidence that closes a case. Yet, when investigators questioned Monica about him, she claimed to hardly know the man at all. She told detectives she wasn't even sure of his last name, insisting she only knew him as Rob, some guy she'd see at the gym. But when they confronted her with the evidence of Baker's blood in the Porsche, Monica spun an elaborate, almost comical tale. She claimed she had accidentally whacked him with a racquetball racket during a game, and then, for some reason, brought a bloody towel from the gym back to the Porsche. The story was absurd, a clear sign of desperation, and investigators didn't buy it for a single second. For months, they kept the secret lovers under tight surveillance, documenting a continuing affair that stood in stark contrast to the grieving widow Monica portrayed to the public. The pile of evidence against them was growing: encrypted messages on burner phones, receipts for GPS tracking devices, and, most damning of all, the undeniable proof of their ongoing romance, which began before Fabio's body was even cold. On June 14, 2017, police finally made their move, staging an elaborate sting operation. Monica and Baker were pulled over in what appeared to be a routine traffic stop. Officers told them the car they were driving might be stolen and would need to be checked out. Both suspects were then handcuffed and put into the back of a squad car, one that was secretly wired for sound. The words they exchanged in that moment would come back to haunt them in court. Shortly after, they were placed under arrest and officially charged with conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. As they were booked, the staggering amount of evidence investigators had gathered began to surface. Investigators also planted an undercover officer in a cell with Monica, posing as an inmate. Monica opened up, confiding, "He's not just my lover, he's my confidant, he's my everything." Even with both of them locked up, their twisted romance didn't stop. Police intercepted letters from jail where Monica was already signing her name as Mrs. Baker and Monica Baker. One letter was especially unsettling. She wrote about how much it hurt to not be touched, or intimately explored, or loved by you. In recorded jail conversations, Baker could be heard telling Monica, "I love you, baby. I really do." Their obsession with one another was so intense, they kept planning their future together, even as they were both facing murder charges. Their delusion was absolute. Monica Semitelli's trial kicked off with bombshell testimony from Christopher Austin, the parole officer who had taken part in the murder in exchange for a plea deal. Austin had agreed to testify against Monica, and his account was damning. He detailed the reconnaissance mission, which was disguised as a simple dinner invitation, and described how Monica had specifically pointed out the backyard area where Fabio would later be killed. He recalled Baker's promises of a big insurance payout, but in a shocking turn of events, Robert Baker himself took the stand to testify for Monica's defense. In what seemed to be an effort to save her, he claimed she knew nothing about the murder plot. Baker insisted he acted alone, driven by his obsession with her, saying he wanted her to be around him and with him more, like all the time. While Baker's testimony may have introduced some reasonable doubt, prosecutors had a mountain of circumstantial evidence: the GPS trackers, the unlocked back door, the perfectly timed shopping trip to Target for an alibi, the immediate questions about the insurance policy, the romantic getaways. While Fabio's family was in mourning, it all pointed directly to Monica as the mastermind. As Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman argued to the jury, at its core, the case was about betrayal. Monica had fooled everyone: her husband, her own children, her friends, and the investigators. She had masterminded every single detail of the murder. The prosecution presented a particularly powerful argument, focusing on Monica's actions right after the murder. She left her teenage daughters at home alone that night, apparently not worried about the so-called dangerous burglars who had just taken their father's life. And why? Because there was never any real danger. She knew exactly who the killers were. Monica's defense attorney countered that she was guilty of many things: stupidity, duplicity, lying, adultery, but not of murder. He painted her as a foolish woman who got caught up in an affair and was manipulated by Baker's dangerous obsession. It was up to the jury to decide: was Monica an innocent victim of Baker's fixation, or was she the calculating mastermind who orchestrated her own husband's brutal murder for money and passion? On April 11, 2025, after 8 hours of deliberation spread across 3 days, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, with special circumstances of murder for financial gain, and lying in wait charges that carried a mandatory sentence of life without parole. On June 23, 2025, Monica Semitelli was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge made a point of stating for the record: in listening to the evidence in this matter, I do find that the defendant was the mastermind in this conspiracy to commit murder. Robert Baker had already been handed his own sentence of life without parole, after he pleaded no contest. For his cooperation with the prosecution, Christopher Austin received a sentence of 16 years to life. Monica Semitelli traded away 20 years of marriage, her family's future, and her own freedom, all for a fantasy built on a foundation of blood and betrayal. Her daughters effectively lost both of their parents, one to murder and the other to greed and obsession. They are now left to navigate life on their own. Now aware that his stepmother masterminded his father's murder, Fabio's son from his first marriage, Luigi, treasures his father's Rolex. He had this on all the time, Luigi shares. He was wearing it when he passed. I put it on for important occasions, whenever I want to feel my dad's presence. That Rolex, an item the killers could have easily taken but chose to leave, has become the ultimate symbol of what this case was never truly about. This was never a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't about timepieces or cash or any other possessions. It was about a woman who demanded everything. She craved passion, excitement, money, a whole new life, and was fully prepared to shatter her family to obtain it. Fabio Semitelli, in contrast, had built a wonderful life, through pure hard work and dedication. He guided young stylists, collaborated with Hollywood stars, and cherished his family with all his heart. Today, several scholarships and educational programs honor his name, ensuring his legacy of kindness lives on. But his life was cut short at just 49 by the person who knew him most intimately, loved him the very least, and wanted his money above all else. In the end, Monica achieved her goal of a life with Robert Baker, just not the one she fantasized about. In place of luxurious vacations and insurance payouts, they are set to spend the rest of their natural lives in separate correctional facilities. Their sordid love story has been reduced to supervised phone calls and letters screened by guards. This case is a chilling testament to the fact that the greatest threats can come from those we hold closest, from the person lying next to us, sharing our home, raising our kids, the very one who promises to love us until death do us part. Sometimes, that promise is meant more literally than we could ever possibly imagine. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're fascinated by mysteries from all corners of the world, Check out our brand new channel, Latin Crimes, where we take a deep dive into the most riveting true crime cases from Latin America. Don't let it pass you by. Subscribe now for more gripping investigations.